Welcome back to the channel folks, and to another 28mm historical painting tutorial. Now it's been a long time since I posted one of these. I've been so busy painting Flames of War, I have to be honest here folks. You know, I've got a commission service and it's full-time commission service, which means full-time painting, which doesn't leave a lot of time to squeeze in other subjects such as these. These are the Warlord games, pike and shot English Civil War Cavalry, a Roundhead and a Cavalier. In this video I'm going to show you how I use my layering approach to get a sort of dark and grim looking Roundhead and a bright and breezy looking Cavalier, taking the same approach and getting quite different end results, but both results will look nice and distinctive and stand out on the tabletop. That's the whole idea with the layering approach and the high contrast that you can generate. If you're familiar with the channel, you know that I layer up from a dark base. Typically it's going to be German Camo black brown. It could be black as well for greys and metallics. It could also be, though I've not used it in this case, olive drab for lighter areas. During the video you'll hear me refer to external shade or border shade and internal shade. Now the difference there is the internal shade is shade that's left within a defined area, such as a tunic, such as a pair of gloves. Whereas external or border shade is the shade I'm going to leave between all the distinct areas of the mini, such as a sleeve and a glove. You won't see me doing any washing or dry brushing. That is not typically part of the approach that I take. However, you could apply a wash, an all over even wash, to a surface to change the tone of the colour if you wanted to get a particular look to then continue your layering, but it's not something I use for shading. If you want to see how I paint the horses, go to the 28mm historical figure playlist. There's lots of guides in there that include horses. I'm not going to put them in this guide just to keep it from getting too long. And check all the playlists out folks, because there are hundreds of videos there that could be of interest to you. But anyway, enough of me chatting, let's get over to the first figure, which is going to be the dark and grim Cavalier. I'm going to start this figure with the metallic areas, that's like the breastplate, the helmet and so on. And I'm going to do a very simple non-metallic metal approach here, starting with an undercoat of black. I'm then going to add a layer of German grey, and I'm only going to leave the black on the external shading here, the boundary shading. I'm not going to leave any black on the internal shade. Then over the top of the German grey I'm going to layer some dark grey. Now you can use lighter colours than this if you want a lighter, more brighter kind of finish, but I'm after quite a dark finish here too. And we can use this same approach on other metal areas, such as the pistol here, the flintlock. You can do it on swords too, but bear in mind that the smaller the area is, the brighter you want it to be, so it stands out against the rest of the miniature. So we're starting to build up the metallic finish here, a patina so to speak, quite a dark one in this case, but it's going to be that dark edge from the black, then there'll be a little bit of shade from the German grey, and then the main colour is going to be that dark grey. So we're building up to that point and then we're going to highlight from there. So just bear in mind you don't want too much of your shade colour showing. They are there to help create the transition from the darker areas to the lighter areas, and that's the same principle we're going to follow across the rest of the figure. The main highlight colour is going to be London grey. Now I'm going to apply this on edges of various of the small plates, for instance on the edges of the breastplate, top and bottom, and then across the rest of the breastplate I'm just going to be painting just a few lines to create the impression of a bit of a glint. I'm not going to paint patches of highlight onto there, just a little bit to break up the larger areas but not make them overly bright. Remember, this is just a bit of a highlight. As a simple guide to this layering approach, I work on a sort of percentage. It's hard to define that exactly to each figure, but if you think of it in terms of this, we want to see 70% of your main colour, then 20% highlight, and only 10% of your shade colour, whether that's the external like the boundary shade or internal shade on each individual area of the figure. So 70, 20, 10 creates a nice balance and allows you to transition up from dark to light. I'm going to apply one final very thin, very fine highlight to the metal here because I want to give it a little bit of a glint. So it is staying dark, but it's going to have sharper edges that will help it stand out a bit, but it won't make it too well framed. And I'm going to use a little bit of deck tan for this. And as you can see, I'm really very careful about where I'm putting this on. It is just for a little bit of metallic glint. Now on to the tunic, which is the second largest area of this miniature other than the breastplate, and I'm going to be creating a sort of typical tan kind of colour that you see across most of the images, the artwork from the period. I'm going to layer this up through old wood to Iraqi sand. Now remember, the coat we're putting on just now is the shade coat. I am going for a darker look to these guys, so I want to leave some of the internal shade from the German Camo black brown. But very careful we don't leave too much, folks, or it becomes too stripy. You'll see me following the shape of the miniature, like the easiest areas are such as the arms where there's so many folds are sculpted in. Other areas will have to work a bit harder ourselves to create a bit of depth to it. But I'm going to do this in two passes, folks. Remember, you want a nice smooth finish. You're not going to get that all in one pass, in one coat, and also follow the folds in one pass and then go back to it and then define the final look, the final amount of shade that you're going to leave in there. And by that I mean the internal shade, because elsewhere this US field drab is going to become the shade, the start of the transition up. Here I'm adding that second coat, putting it on nice and wet. Now you don't have to have absolutely sharp edges, folks, between the transitions. If the paint's a little bit wet and you can manage that, then that softens the transition a little bit too. And you can see on the back of the tunic there where I have left some lines of the German Camo black brown as internal shade, and that is creating a bit of detail where there was none, so that that features a bit less flat and has a bit more movement to it. But anyway, just keep working across, getting your second layer on so you've got a nice consistent shade colour, and then defining the amount of the German Camo black brown that's being left so that it's not too strong and too stripy. Now we're going into the main colour here, folks. So we've got two shade layers here just because we want a darker finish. This main colour though still has to dominate. So we're going to put this on in two coats once again, just following the map that we've already created by the shade coats. So we're going to leave little transitions between the German Camo black brown, the US field drab, and then a dominant coat of the old wood. Hopefully you can see how it's brightened up after adding that main coat on, and how the shade is all being pushed into the background. Now we're on to the highlights, and I like to use a bright but non-saturated colour. Just have to look around to see what works best with your base colour. And remember, if you take a different highlight to the same base colour, two different highlights gives you a different look as well, folks. That's something worth bearing in mind. The highlight colour's really important. Now I'm putting on very thin highlights here, thin lines as required, thin dots depending on if you're painting like a button or such likes. In this case, so it's lots of thin lines, and you get the strongest possible contrast where you can get to your highlight beside the shade. In this case it's not going to be easy because we have two layers of shade, so I'm just going to look for high points and edges. But in other situations, as you'll see with the Cavalier, I'll be looking to put the highlight directly beside shade lines, and that creates instant contrast, which helps create a lot of shape. You can see me following the same approach with the gloves. starting with a shade colour, in this case again leaving some internal shade from the German Camo black brown. I'm going to map it out, then I'm going to add my main layer on top of that, and then once that's done we finish off with some more highlights that once again they're bright but they're not too saturated. Now here I've made a bit of a personal choice. Here the bottom of the breastplate has got a belt and then the bottom lip, but I've decided to paint it as a sash. I'm going to paint it as a red sash because I just fancy a little bit of colour around the centre of the figure, but that's just personal choice here folks. Otherwise you would just paint the bottom of the breastplate in the same way as you did the rest, and the brown of the leather belt. There's not much to see off the trousers on this figure folks, so I'm keeping it very simple. I'm using, I think it's flat earth here, but you know, any kind of suitable colour that matches the rest of the palette of the figure will do. And I'm also going to use that as a base colour on the hair, which I will then highlight. Now, I should point out, when you're using browns over the German Camo brown base colour, then your internal shade can always be that German Camo black brown. You don't have to worry about layering up a shade colour on the brown unless you're going for something very specific, perhaps a lighter colour. You can just easily use the German Camo black brown as your internal shade colour to be left in folds, you know, and then add your layers on top, which would typically then be just your main colour and your highlight. For the leather straps and the boots, I'm going to use the same main colour, and that's going to be German Camo medium brown, but I'm going to apply a different highlight which will give a quite different finish to the areas and make them look very distinctive whilst you're keeping your palette nice and simple. And don't forget folks, we're still applying 2 coats here. Unless you've got a very small item and 1 coat will do it, we still need to keep 2 smooth coats. So to highlight the straps I'm going to use orange brown. You've got to apply it sparingly, just on the edge, and it can be a broken highlight as you're working along the edge because you don't have to highlight a complete edge for it to pop. Giving it a bright appearance is all we need to do, and that prevents it getting too neon and saturated. And the orange brown here gives it a nice orange sort of worn leather kind of look. The highlight colour for the boots is going to be US Field Drab, and you can see straight away how that is completely different final look compared to the highlight using orange brown. And on the boots, you know, I'm just going to be following the natural contours of the fabric, mapping it out in the same way as we did on the sleeves of the jacket. Now a quick word on the small metallic areas such as buckles, such as the mechanism for the flintlock on the gun, stirrups and so on. Now here, to make these really pop against the rest of the mini, I give them a coat of black that replaces the German Camo black brown, and it replaces it mostly in terms of the boundary or the external shade so that it stands out against the figure. It's got a nice framing. And then I go straight in with some London Grey. Don't go for a darker colour because it's really just not going to be seen. So London Grey, and then a little spot highlight. It's got to be small, of something bright such as deck tan, just to give it a bit of a glint. To finish off the hair, I'm going to give quite a bold highlight of new wood, and that'll give a bit of a red head appearance to the hair. The wood on the flintlock, I'm going to paint that using flat earth. Now I'm going to keep the shade that's already there because we're working with a brown, so that's German Camo black brown shade, and then just carefully layer up some lines of flat earth with the intention of giving the impression of a very simple and basic wood grain. To help this small object stand out strongly against the rest of the figure, I'm going to use a little bit of a bolder highlight, nothing too saturated still. I'm going to use some old wood and apply that in very thin lines. Now the straps on the stirrups, I'm showing this because I just want you to see how you can get similar browns together but make them look distinctive. So I've used flat earth on these straps and I'm going to highlight them with orange brown, and that's a different kind of palette from the boots and sufficient enough to make them stand out against them. Now we're on to the make or break moment, so to speak, for painting the figures, folks, and that's doing the face. So I always start off with the same shade colour, which is saddle brown, and I apply that all over the face. I don't leave any internal shade. If there's a moustache there, I will leave some shade around that, but I won't leave any internal shade. I won't leave any shade in the eye sockets or leave any shade in the mouth or such like. Just give it a nice solid coat, or 2 solid coats of saddle brown. And then when it comes to doing the eyes, I will use something such as deck tan or ivory, and I'll come in from the side as you see and just paint a little line. It's better that it's a line rather than something that's round. Then using German Camo black brown, I'm just going to paint a line straight down through the eyes. Any mistakes we can now tidy up with a little bit of saddle brown, and there we go, a painless start to the difficult face. Now using Panzerace's flesh base, we're going to start layering up the face to create that distinctive face shape that we all recognise and that will make it really stand out on the tabletop. So just follow the map that's already there. You've got brows, nose, cheeks, lips, jaw, ears. Look for all those kind of things and just pick them out against that darker saddle brown. And to highlight, I'm going to be using small amounts of flat flesh. You can see I'm putting it across the brows and under the eyes, down the nose, lips, chin, just accentuating the shape. And then of course for this figure, this particular choice I've made, I've gone and hidden the face behind the helmet guard. But you know, if you're going to do that, you don't have to spend a lot of time painting the face. It's not really going to be seen. You can do it of course if you want to know it's been done, but you're not going to do it because you want someone to see it on the tabletop. You know, so these are wargame figures. Paint sensible as well as to the best of your ability. So as I'm finishing off here, let's just summarise what we've seen before we move on to a nice bright Cavalier. So we've been building up the layers. There's no washes, no dry brushes, it's just layers getting painted on. We've got a sort of 70, 20, 10 split as far as shade colour, main colour and highlight goes. And then to get a bit of a darker finish, we've been leaving a lot of the internal shade in. In most cases that's the German Camo black brown, but where there's something really dark, it may well be that we're going to use black to replace that. And the intended result that I've hopefully achieved here is to get a figure that's not too saturated and it's going to stand out strongly on the tabletop. It's not too bright, but it's got plenty of shape, plenty of depth. So now let's move on to something which is going to be using brighter colours and approaching the shade that we're going to leave on the figure in a different way. Let's move on to the Cavalier. We're going to be taking the same approach to the Cavalier as we did to the Roundhead in general terms, but we're going to achieve a brighter finish by reducing the amount of internal shade that we've got on the figure. That helps brighten the whole look. You know, if you leave internal shade, it'll darken an area. If you brighten things up a bit by leaving no internal shade, then it lifts the whole thing out. So we're going to be using brighter colours, but also we're going to be using less internal shade. So you can see on the tunic here, I've given it a solid undercoat of flat blue. No lines of internal shade from the German Camo black brown are visible, only external or border shade around the cuffs, around the trousers and such likes. Now that the shade is down, I'm going to add the main layer, and that is going to be Ultramarine, and I'm going to map this out in the same way as I would with the other darker approach. I'm going to be leaving the shade in the folds, and I'm going to be picking out all the high points or creating fake folds, so to speak, on the flatter areas by just leaving lines of shade as appropriate to create the shape that I'm after. And once again, I'm going to come back to do 2 coats on this, folks. to get the coverage that you need, but also the first coat maps out the basic shape, the second coat finalises that shape, controls the amount of shade that we're leaving, so we're keeping that right, so we're getting that right 70, 20, 10 proportion that we're after. The highlight colour I'm using here is Azure. It's a very bright highlight. It's not too saturated however, but because it's bright you just got to make sure you don't use it in too heavy a quantity. Keep the lines nice and thin, otherwise it's going to really wash out the finished look. And whilst that might be something that you're after, in this case I'm not. I just want it to be bright lines to accentuate all the folds, curves, etc. in the shape of the tunic. I'm going to paint the trousers white here, and I'm going to layer up from London Grey through Deck Tan to either off-white or white, depending on how bright you want the finished look to be. I'm not leaving any internal shade. Once again, there is no German Camo black brown visible in any of the folds, because I'm now going to leave the London Grey in there, as you see, and map out the shape of the folds, the knee and such likes. And then I'm going to give it a highlight with some off-white or white just to help accentuate the shape. And you can leave as little or as much of that London Grey in there to get as bright or as dark a look in the area as you want. For the sash, I am going to stay in the bright spectrum here folks with yellow. Now yellow can be a tricky colour to paint. I keep my bottles upside down, which means the paint comes out really thick. You just got to thin it, but then you've got complete control over it and you can layer it up very easily using this approach if you store it that way. Now I'm starting with tan yellow as my shade colour. I use that for yellow. It's a very versatile kind of colour that will cover most situations where you need a shade for yellow, and it's a good solid base coat. And then I'm moving on to flat yellow to start mapping in my layers. Now I have left a little bit of the German Camo black brown around the knot in the sash because there's a lot going on there and it just helps give it a bit of shape. And the highlight colour is ice yellow, and just apply this as we have done in the previous areas folks. Now I should point out that the tunic was beginning to not annoy me but make me think it kind of didn't look defined enough, and I felt it needed something to help complete its shape, especially on the tabletop when you've seen it from a distance. So I'm going to add a hem to it, and that will really help frame it, make it stand out against the rest of the figure, give a nice solid core for the figure. So what I'm doing here is I'm using red. You could use any other suitable darker than blue but suitable colour to do this, I would suggest folks. So I'm starting with burnt cadmium red, and I'm just going to paint a hem and a collar all around it. Nothing on the sleeves, no cuffs, because they're going to be covered by the gloves, but as you can see all around the outside edges of the tunic. Next I'm going to be painting on some red. That's all it says on the bottle folks, red, and leaving a little bit of the burnt cadmium red as a shade colour, a border edging kind of colour between it and the blue. And then it's on to some orange red for a highlight just along the edges. Nice simple edge highlight, maybe accentuate the corners a little bit more, but very simple process here. And that really just helps, to my eye anyway, define the shape of the tunic. Now that is all the main colours for the Cavalier, and that's as much as I'm going to cover in the guide, just to prevent the video from getting too long. But don't forget, all the colours that I've used are in the description below, so you can refer to that if you want to see what I've done for the gloves or for the hat or such likes. I'm going to finish the video with some stills, just so you can see some nice pictures of the finished results. Hopefully you enjoyed it and found it interesting folks. If you've got any comments, any questions, stick them down below in the comments section. The colours are there as well, remember, if you want to know exactly what layers that I used. And if you'd like to ask about a commission, then email the address that is just coming up on screen just now, and we can give you full details. We mainly do Flames of War just now, but we have also done lots of 28mm stuff too. So it just leaves me to say thanks for watching, as always folks. Thanks to the subscribers who follow the channel and those of you who just drop in from time to time. If you'd like to help support the channel, hit the subscribe button and hit the bell button, and that means we'll definitely see you all on the next one.